Hello, everybody. Welcome. Thanks so much for being here. I'm Greg Dixon. I'm the chair of the Pacific Northwest section of the AES, and I also work in Redmond, Washington as assistant professor of music and sound design at DigiPen Institute of Technology. I'd like to welcome everybody here to our first ever online meeting of the section, and we are going to continue to meet virtually until it is safe for our membership to meet in person once again. The Pacific Northwest section of the AES is one of the things that I truly cherish about living in this area. I would like to give a special thanks to Dan Mortensen and also to our committee for helping us lead the charge into this wild and strange virtual meeting world. I'd also like to extend thanks to Steve Turnage, who has been a consistent source of help and support for our section as we adapt to virtual meetings. Also, a thank you to Bill Gibson, who will be helping us moderate questions this evening. Now I'd like to introduce our speaker, the owner and operator of the live sound company, Dan Sound, Dan Mortensen.
Welcome, everybody, and thank you. This meeting is going to be a mix of me live talking with slides, plus edited video recordings that I've made to show you more than I could show you in a reasonable time period about what I'm going to talk to you about. And I cut out all of the pauses that I have in those things, so you're not going to hear it the way I'm talking now, but I was trying to sound like those guys who do the funny car race and BMX motocross ads, where it just goes on like crazy and there goes one from one thing to the next. And so if you'll listen to it in that vein, I would appreciate it. And I just want to point out too that it's extremely odd being on both sides of the camera at once. There's no crew here really. I'm doing all the switching and stuff, so you'll see me looking over to see what needs to happen next. Usually our meetings go for about 3 hours altogether, and that seems to be painless. We decided that this thing needed to be in shorter bursts. So it's going to be roughly an hour and a half total, not counting questions. And I hope you do ask questions. And I wanted to say that it's entirely likely that I will misstate some important fact. In one of the videos, I say something about an XLR being wired so that there's one ground and two ungrounded pins. And in fact, what I meant was unbalanced signals, two unbalanced signals. So when you hear that eventually later, remember that. But if you would correct me to Bill, and Bill will ask me or tell me stuff gently. So this is going to go, like I said, about an hour and a half, and there'll be a question and answer break about every 20 minutes or so. And at the second one of those, we'll extend it out so that it's 15 more minutes so that you can get up and do whatever you want to and go get the cookies. So all of what I'm going to tell you is what I've found to be right for me and my workflow, but it may not be right for you. All of us know that there's more than one right way to do sound, and I hope that maybe you'll see something that will either encourage you to do something different and take it to someplace else, or to affirm that you're doing it right now. Dan Sound Inc. is an Apple and Behringer Midas-centric house, so my experience is with iPads, Airport Expresses, but some Linksys routers, and Macs. I've tried to keep this general and platform agnostic, but I find that I'm often saying, when I mean tablet, I'm saying when you grab your iPad or whatever, and you should interpret that as meaning more generic than I intend it to be. And in full disclosure, Dan Sound Inc. is a dealer for both Midas and Behringer, but I don't think that this is any kind of sales deal, and I'm not expecting anybody to buy anything. I'd be astonished if anybody bought anything. So I'm going to tell you my wedding gig story, and it's not about my wedding, it's about a gig that I did. And this is relevant because all of the stuff that I'm going to show you is somewhat as a result of what happened to me this event and my trying to figure out what the hell that was all about. So anyway, it was these people got married in their backyard on their patio. Actually, they were in the yard. They had a band on their patio, and the patio was kind of next to this garage. At the time, the only Behringer digital console that existed was the full-size one. So it's about 3 feet wide and in its case, over 100 pounds or so. And the only place to put that thing during the event was in their garage, which was kind of behind the band and down some stairs, but easy to get to with a vehicle, obviously. And I decided that that would be a great time to try out this newfangled tablet control of the console. So I ran a power cable from there with a cat cable up through the door and laid the Airport Express on the concrete wall that was there and out of the way of everybody. And we did a sound check. Oh, I should tell you where my mix position was. There was just enough room right next to the main door into the kitchen from the patio, which is where everybody is going to go in and out throughout the thing. There's just enough room on one side of it to put a road case with the iPads. Somebody's mic is on. With these iPads on top of the road case with me to be there to mix them. And I had 3 iPads because there was 20 some inputs for the show. And I don't like doing the layers as much. I like being able to reach for something and grab it. I'm still in the analog world that way. If those of you who've mixed on digital tablets or consoles know that there's a lot of layers. There's way more features, so the same control can do a different thing at different times. Anyway, there was enough space right there for me to do my thing, and the sound check went great. The first 2/3 of the show went fabulous, maybe even 3/4. And about at that moment where it stopped going great, I was looking at the 3 iPads and every one of them lost the symbol that tells you that it's connected to the console. It's like, oh man, okay, what do I do? You should know that when that happens with any of these consoles, when you lose control, the console stays working in the state that it was in when it stopped working. So nothing shuts off, nothing changes drastically, but if you had left something off or on that shouldn't be off or on, you're not going to be able to change it if you're on the iPad that is not connected. So I'm frozen there going, well, do I run to the garage and worm my way through the band while they're playing and get into this place where I can neither see nor hear? And what do I do once I'm there? I can't see or hear anything. Or do I stay here and hope that it comes back? So I thought about that for about 3 hours. And that was actually in 10 seconds in real time, but it felt like 3 hours. So at the end of that 3 hours, I looked at the iPads and the 3 lights came back on to be connected and the rest of the show went fine. So nobody knew anything happened and it was fine, but I was petrified and wanting to know what happened there. So that's in part where all of this stuff that I'm going to show you comes from. So first, let's look at the meaning of this phrase, mixing on glass. What does that mean? I've come up with 2 possibilities. One of them is using a wireless cordless tablet or other similar handheld device to control all the operational parameters of a digital mixing console which has any form factor. And we'll get to what I mean by that in a second here. Location of that handheld device can be anywhere in the room as desired by the operator. Okay? So here's an example of 1 through 6, numbers 1 through 6 consoles here. Those are all essentially the same console. They have the same capabilities. They're all 32 mic pre inputs if you have the right outboard gear for the smaller ones. There's 16 outputs. There's a bunch of aux in and a bunch of aux out, and then two Ethercon connectors that go to either stage boxes or other consoles. So let's examine the form factors here. 1 and 2 each have, those are full-size consoles, and they each have 16 input sliders that are switchable in banks to get to your 32 channels. The next 8 faders on either to the right are always output faders, and then there's a bunch of other stuff on these consoles. The number 3 and 4 have 16 faders, 2 banks of 8, And each bank of 8 can be either inputs or outputs, depending on how you set it up. There's 16 built-in mic pre's and connectors on the back, but you can add an outboard stage box to get up to 32, so it's the same features as 1 and 2. And 3 and 4 can also be rack mounted. You can put rack mount ears on those, so that's how wide they are. They fit in a rack. So 5 and 6 are specifically rack mount. They're not, there's no faders on them. 5 has some controls on it, and you could mix a show on that, and people have, but it's much more convenient to have some kind of control surface. And it still has 32 ins and 16 outs. And number 6 has no physical controls for all intents and purposes. And you have to have some kind of control surface, whether it's a computer or a tablet. Number 7 is a different duck. That's the X-Air series, and it is the XR18. And it only has 16 inputs. It's never going to have more than that. It has a total of 8 outputs, and it's never going to have more than that. You can't add a stage box or anything, and there's no controls on it whatsoever, so you've got to have some kind of control surface for that. The price range on these is reasonably wide. It's roughly 3 to 4K on the high end, which is number 2, and somewhere around 500 or so for the low end, which is number 7, and the rest are in between that. So the other definition of mixing on glass is using a desktop or touchscreen computer, which is too large to be handheld, to control all the operational parameters of a digital mixing console, which might have no other user interface. If you had another user interface, I don't think you would use this whole thing, but I don't know. These computers are connected to the mixer and power by the necessary cables, meaning that you've got this on the end of a snake. And here's some pictures of that kind of system. This is Elton John's monitor rig with his monitor engineer, Alan Richardson. And the mixing console is the SAC system from RML Labs. This is a picture and from an article in FOH magazine, which is really great. And I can't tell which of those racks has the console part in it, but that's clearly a computer touchscreen on top there, and it looks like there's some physical faders under his hand there. And that's as much as I know about that one. These next couple pictures were sent to me from Mal Brown. This is Mal's Dell computer and iPad sitting on a table with a DMX controller next to it that may or may not be sound. And he uses the Soundcraft series, whose names I can't remember, but he can share that with us later if he wants. And here's a closer up picture of the computer screen. That's a touchscreen computer and keyboard and mouse, of course. And it looks like you can see a lot of faders, and there's some EQ and compressor gates and other mix sliders up on the top there. It looks really nice. I used to have Soundcraft stuff and I really liked it. Now I got this one from James Paul with no context whatsoever. And I'm pretty sure that's not James. It looks like there's 2 touchscreen computers up on top there with 3 banks of 8 faders each under hands down below, and there's some push buttons in the middle there on the side, and maybe those are VU meters, those lit up horizontal stripes, I don't know. But that's in a really nice wooden case. It's pretty much the same form factor as an old analog mixer, but it's definitely not an old analog mixer. So what we're going to concentrate on today is this wireless cordless tablet definition. And that's what I'm going to start talking about. So there's some general principles that I want to convey, and this is also going to be kind of an overview of what we're going to be talking about. So first, what to look for when buying a digital mixer or tablet, what to do to make them work together at the gig, what to do to keep them working together at the gig, what other gear you need to accomplish the above, and then finally mixing on a tablet at a sound check and show. And we're going to do a simulated situation like that for you. Okay, so first, what to look for. The tablet should be able to control all of the parameters of the console. And now you have to look at me for a minute here because I'm going to tell a story. Some of these consoles that have come out are kind of hybrids. They're some analog and some digital. The important part about digital to me is that there's full recallability for every parameter. And as you shift from scene to scene, you can take groups of inputs from over here, and the inputs will be set up properly for that. The next scene, you can take your inputs from over here, and the inputs and all of the parameters will be appropriate for that, etc. So as you jump from scene to scene, the entire console moves around to be what it should be. I've seen digital consoles that have input trims that are analog. There's a knob there, and everything after that maybe is digital, but that one thing is not. So you have to physically adjust the input trims with every scene. And I think that's a complete fail. I don't understand why that has any use whatsoever. Certainly does not in my world, and maybe it does in yours. So there's my opinion. So going back to the next thing here, whether or not you can control that stuff is a function of the app and not the tablet. Although the app has to support your specific tablet, and your tablet has to be capable of running the app. The ability of the console to have an app that lets the user control the console comes from the manufacturer. Usually, the app comes from the console maker, but depending on some factors that we won't go into now, but they're basically how open it is, the manufacturer is to other people knowing what's going on in the guts of its unit, it's possible to have third-party apps, and I've heard of a couple of those. So this here is the first movie we're going to see here, and this is the Midas M32 app. And the Behringer app is basically exactly the same as this, except the color scheme is a little different, and I kind of like this color scheme better. So here we go. So this is what the M32 app on the iPad looks like. You can see up on top here, these are inputs 1 through 8, 9 through 16, etc., up to 32. Then there's some aux inputs here, sure, tipping sleeve in and out, effects returns, bus outs 1 through 8, 9 through 16, matrix and master out, and then DCAs over here, which are like VCAs. You can see here that this little symbol is the Wi-Fi symbol and indicates that we've got a good connection when it's green. If this is red, that means you got a problem. It means we're connected to the router and the console as well. If you want to look at any given channel, this is the first tab in the individual channel detail section, configuration and preamp. And in here you can pick the source. So in all the other channels, to get all of these to light up here, they are all set to input 8, so that this channel is going to all of these things that are lighting up in one way or another. You can link channels together here to make a stereo channel. Pushing this button would link number 8 to number 7. It's always an odd and an even, with the odd being left and even being right. When you do that, it switches the pan pots so that 7 is left and 8 is right. If you unlink it, those pan pots stay panned, so you need to manually go and change them back. So be aware of that. Change the polarity of the input. You set the input trim here, so this is an important place. This is where you do the phantom power. You can do a delay on each of the inputs, nothing or almost nothing to 500 milliseconds. And you do a low cut in or out on this. You can do inserts, which is more complex than I want to get into. This is whether stereo is activated or not. When I did this everywhere, these are the effects returns right here, which we'll get to in a minute. And I neglected to undo that. So the first go around with this explanation was unintelligible because there was so much effects on everything. You can also go to the mono channel, which is often used for subs, activate or deactivate it. The DCA sends are here. You can activate any of these to go to one or more DCAs, and you can also set up mute groups here. There's an auto mix feature, which is only on the first 8 channels, uses Dan Dugan's algorithm, and it's pretty cool, although unfortunately Dan doesn't get any money from this, and I wish he did. So we go to the next tab, and it's gate, and you can have it be active or not active. It's not active right now. There it's active, but we don't need a gate on my voice. There's also dynamics, which is actually compressor or expander, and you can choose between those. And I've got that active because I want it to do just a little bit of gain reduction when I emphasize something a little too much. And I've got it 2-to-1 because I like that, and I like these settings over here, the attack and hold and release. Those are fine. I think these are the stock settings. This is what comes up every time you go to a compressor. It's also got a 4-band parametric EQ, and I have a sibilance up here that I take out of myself, and I don't really have any low end happening. We'll go over to sends. This is one way to do for monitors. 1 through 12 are easily available. 13 through 16 are reserved in this configuration for effects sends, but you can change that around, and you can change all of these from post fader to post EQ, pre-fader, pre-EQ, whatever. Then you can go through and name things, and I chose this color for my color here, and this is the wireless headset, and these letters don't get any bigger, so you've got to wear your glasses sometime if you're old like me. The last one is presets. The other thing I wanted to show here is that another way to do monitor mixing is to use this sends on fader button, and then you can select any of the 16 mixes here and adjust all of these for mix 4, or all of those for mix 1, or whatever mix you choose to go to here. And that's real handy. That's a real quick way to do monitors. Now let's look at this row on the top here. Yeah, so this is the detail that gets you to all of these tabs for the selected channel. Next, we have the effects button. And I'm just going to scroll through them. You can choose from, there's 8 effect slots, and there's probably 50 different effects you can put into the first 4, and probably 30 or 40 into the second 4. And I'm just scrolling through to show you these last 4 are set up to be graphics for people who like that kind of thing. So this one is reading bus 1 and 2, which is my headset, or actually this output to the camera. This is bus 3 and 4, which is monitors, usually 5 and 6 same, and 8 is left and right. Scenes, there's only one scene loaded into this console, and that's this one for this event. And to change scenes, the scene that you're changing to appears here, and you just drag it, and then it appears over here to show that that's the current one. And because this was what was already in there, nothing really changed, I believe. Also in this section, though, you can set up parameters to be safe for when you change scenes. So you can set up on the input channels the preamp, the config page, the EQ, gate and compressor, insert, etc., etc. So you can do a lot of things to save settings from one scene to another, and it can either be parameters or it can be channels. So you can light up any of these to keep those constant across scenes, which is a cool feature and helpful. There's also a meters page, and I set up some compressors and some gates to make this more colorful. The thing has a built-in 2-channel USB stick recording setup, and you can choose where you want it to come from, what you play back. If I had a USB stick in there, the first song that's available would be here, and you can scroll through with that, and you can also record onto this, and there's also an SD recorder, the SD card, that you have to set up to be able to record. It's set up now to be 32 in and 32 out. You record all of those things. And I'm showing you this to show the completeness of console depiction on the iPad that is necessary as far as I'm concerned. So here on the routing page, you can select any group of 8 inputs you want on this for these different channels, where the aux inputs come from. You can select how the outputs are patched. In this case, output 1 is mix bus 1 and 2, 7 and 8 are left and right, etc. And you can also do delays here for any of these outputs. Like if I wanted to delay the left output, I would just do that, and then I can dial it in up to 500 milliseconds. And it's pretty handy. Then the monitor. You can put delay, monitor outputs, the level, you can mute it, and you can set up some solo options. You can set up talkback, where you want the talkback microphone to go, whether it's an external mic or whatever. And there's 2 different talkback configurations you can do. There's also an oscillator in here that has sine wave, pink noise, white noise. You can route it to wherever you want it to go. Then the last one is the setup page, and this first tab is for the iPad, and I wanted to show you how you can turn the mini meters. These are all the mini meters. You can turn those on or off, and although it's nice to see those, that there is some bandwidth taken up with those, and I have wondered how much, if in a marginal connection situation, that is a problem. And there's some other things. There's some global settings for different things, which I'm not going to get into. Configuration, remote, if you're controlling via MIDI or whatever. Some preamp adjustments for blocks of 8. Your setup for the X32 card, and then some assignables. On some consoles, the full-size consoles, there's a couple of encoders, and this one has 8 buttons that you can assign to be different things. So that is the iPad interface, and pretty much everything that is on the console is in this iPad, and that's handy because there's some consoles that have no physical controls for all intents and purposes, and it's nice to be able to adjust those. All right. So this is a question and answer time. If anybody has any questions that you want to speak up, feel free.
Well done.
Thank you. That wasn't a question. Okay. Anybody want to say anything?
Who makes that program?
That's Behringer Midas program, which is useful only on their consoles. So any of those first 6 consoles can be controlled by what you saw there.
Okie doke.
And every manufacturer nowadays of a digital console will have some kind of program like that to let you control their gear. Some of them are not as complete as that, I've heard. Some of them have some other features that aren't part of this one. Any other questions? Do you want to stretch or anything before we move on? We got another 20 minutes here before the long break.
I don't know if you're going to address this later, but do you have anything in particular that you use to manage battery life on a remote device? Like if you're going through a tech rehearsal, what do you do to make sure that it survives the entire process? That's a good question, and I was going to tangentially answer it later, but I think this is a fine time to answer it now. You're right, there is a finite battery life for the tablets. Having the screen full bright diminishes your life considerably. I've found maybe a doubling of life by getting it down. If you're in a fairly dark area, in system preferences, at least in the iPad, you can adjust the brightness. There's a slider there, display brightness. And you can double or even triple the life of it by taking it down from full brightness and having it be fairly low, just so that you can see it as a glow. You do want to take your charger with you. You do want to have some spare stuff with you that I'll talk about in a minute. And there are those USB battery packs that work great on these. You can put it in your pocket, like I've got this wireless mic pack, and run a USB cable out your shirt and plug the thing in and work on it while it's charging there. So that's as much as I do, pretty much.
Can you comment on
the size of the tablet and how the software might reconfigure itself for like a mini iPad or a larger, or if you're going to carry around a 32-inch TV under your arm. You know, the tablets come in so many different sizes. What can you
Yes,
comment on how the software works there?
I can only comment up to a certain point, and after that you'll have to do further research. For the iPad mini and the normal size iPad, you just have the bigger screen. It fills the bigger screen. My understanding with particularly the computers, so a big screen, the touch screen guys, that software, at least for a while, only got so big it wouldn't fill the whole screen, unfortunately, which seemed to me to be a real disadvantage. We saw on Mal's picture that his was filling his whole screen. That was a pretty big screen. I think that was a 21 or 22 or something. So different manufacturers will do different things. The Behringer has changed a little bit over the years. The tablets I use are probably is it 10-inch? The iPad Pro 10.7 or something diagonal. And that's big enough for my eyes, for my old eyes. Did I answer the question?
Yeah, I think what I heard was you're going to have to try it out.
That's basically it, yes. I'm sorry,
Okay.
I don't know every tablet or every system. And every manufacturer is going to have a little different take on what they put in it and how they answer your exact question, I think.
All right, thank you.
Thank you. Anything else before we move on? All right, thanks. Next, the console should be able to support multiple tablets. Why is that important? As I mentioned earlier, I like to be able to see and control multiple layers at once. So one tablet, at least in this system, shows 8 faders at any given moment, 8 channels. And wherever on the console it is, there's 8 things that you can see. If you have 2 tablets, you can see 16 things at a time. If you have 3, you can see, whatever is that, 24. And if you could conceivably, the Behringer consoles will support 12 tablets. So you could conceivably have 96 channels visible, which is more than the whole console has, or pretty close to more. And then you get into a problem of tablet management and where they are. How do you address 12 tablets? But where that comes in handy is if you have a band of trusted musicians who you work with all the time, who you trust not to get into your part of the console, but to stay in their part, because they can adjust their monitor sends and some other features on either a tablet or a phone even, if the manufacturer has a phone app, as the Behringer does. So that's real handy, because then they're doing their own mixes and you're not. So as a sound operator, how do you physically manage multiple iPads? And this is a thing that I built for 3 of them. That's some stuff I had around, a rack rail and some plexiglass type stuff, Tough-Ack, and some screws and a speaker stand adapter. And it's sitting on a speaker stand now, which is real handy for when I am doing a gig with behind a tall bunch of seats. I can raise that as high as I need to, and it'll work. Sitting on top of the rack on the left there is the table stand version of that. And here it is sitting on the table stand, so that I've got 24 channels visible there. On the back of that, there's a 4-banger charger, 4 USB outputs with captive cords to charge things in case that occurs. And all I have to do is run that AC to a nearby power outlet, and those guys will charge. So here's what they look like in the dark. What I've done is got color-coded banks of 8, and our national flag is red, white, and blue, so I can remember that order pretty easily. And I do red, white, blue, and green, and blue didn't show up very well in the picture, so I've got channels 1 through 8 on red, 9 through 16 are predominantly white, and then we jump over to 25 through 32 is green. Magenta is effects returns, And I forget what color left and right and matrix are. But color coding stuff lets you keep track, because each of these iPads can be any part of the console, and it gets confusing if you've got your outputs on the left and the inputs on the right, but you need a way to keep things straight. So one thing that concerns me about doing mixes with multiple iPads is when you are doing a mix on a normal console that weighs 100 or 200 pounds or something, when you have to leave the mix position and go somewhere, you can be reasonably assuming that it's going to be there when you come back. But I'm not so sure about iPads. Those are easy to shove under your coat or something and walk. So I had my wife, Kathy, who's you'll meet later here, made these covers for me out of a fairly heavy fabric that I've got, and we used these big Velcro seal strips on the bottom there. So this is a bag basically that goes over what you saw, the iPads. And when you seal it up, any cords that you've got running under there can still get through. And this Velcro makes a huge noise when you go to tear it apart. So it probably wouldn't work too well to do a quiet gig and have to leave and then come back and make a big noise. The other possibility that I've thought of is having a shoulder bag or something that's big enough to hold however many iPads you've got, and just grab them all and stick them in the bag when you've got to go up to the stage or whatever. So back to how to figure these things out. How important to you is it to have delays on the outputs? That seems to be a price point thing. The cheaper consoles don't have that. The more expensive ones, meaning every one other than the XR series, has both delays on outputs and on every input. So how will you get help when you can't figure something out? There's online forums you can go to. If you have friends who have the same thing, that's a great thing, because misery loves company and people like to help you figure stuff out. Can you try this stuff before you buy it? Well, not really anymore, but the reviews and online and people's reports of them in the online forums are really good indicators. Finally, on this little section, can you afford to buy 2 of them? And why would you want to do that? I'll tell you why, and I want to explore this concept a little bit. First, what level of gig are you doing? Are you doing free gigs because you love doing sound? People like having you come to do that for them, but they're not able to pay you. Well, if something breaks, if you've got one thing and it breaks, the show is over maybe, if you can't figure out a solution. And that's the way it is. They're not paying you, so what's the deal? And there's nothing wrong with that. However, if you're doing paid gigs that you want to keep doing, where there's a lot of people and money relying on you doing what you're there to do, you got to keep in mind that you're in show business, and the people you're working with are in show business too in some fashion. And show business has a motto: the show must go on. And you remember in Galaxy Quest where Alan Rickman is playing a character who's got a line that he absolutely has to say every time anybody sees him, and everybody loves seeing him. And he's at a Comic-Con with these other guys and he hates doing this line. He's so over it by then, and he says, no, I won't go out. And he refuses to go out on the stage for a while until finally somebody says to him, the show must go on. And he's a trained actor, he's got that in his blood, and he goes out and he does his thing through gritted teeth. You've got to be ready to make the show go on too. And you guys already know that too, but I'm telling you anyway. The thing to remember is that all of this gear is going to turn into junk eventually. It's all going to break at some time. It doesn't matter if it's cheap stuff or it's the most expensive stuff, it's going to turn into junk. So you need to plan for when it breaks and not if it breaks. I used to go to the Final Cut Pro user group to learn how to edit Final Cut Pro. And the leader of that, Ed McNichol, told us that if you have one, you have none. So if you've got a movie or a recording of something and you have only one and you don't have a copy, when that file gets corrupted or lost or whatever, it's gone. So you've got nothing. So if you have 2, then you've got 1, because if one goes bad, you've got a spare. If you have 3, you've got 1 that you use, and if it goes bad, you've still got 1 to use, and you've got a spare. The other part about having 2 is that it lets you confirm proper functioning of the one. So if you have a problem with one of them, you can check the exact same conditions on the other one. And if one works and one doesn't, then you got a problem with the one and you can get it fixed. If it's the same on both, then that's how it's supposed to work. The problem is the nut behind the wheel. You don't know how to use your gizmo. But that helps confirm that you don't know how to use it. So the question really is, can you afford to only have one at the gig? And you've got to answer that for yourself. Now, contrarily, in my role today as the Vidiot providing the video gear, I've got one of some very critical components in the system, and if one of any of those goes bad, we're going to hang up here, or at least I will have to hang up. So we can hope together that that doesn't happen. So what to do to make them work together at the gig? And remember from examples that I told you and other examples that you know about, if they don't work together, you've got a big problem. So first we're going to talk about the Wi-Fi network, and we're going to really dig into it. And I'm sorry it's so boring, but you're an IT person if you're using these tablets, and you need to know some stuff about Wi-Fi and these other many things.
Hey, Dan, this is Bill.
Yes, Bill.
Just before you get into that, because I know
Okay.
this is good stuff coming up here.
Let me go back.
Matt Castle wanted to mention that magnets sewn into the fabric on your iPad or your iPad covers would be quiet.
That's great. Thank you, Matt.
Especially some of those,
awesome.
like the
Yes.
Warrior magnets are super strong.
Yes, that's a great idea. Thank you.
and then Hano
Yes.
says I hear that the Apple app doesn't work with the new iPad OS if it hasn't been updated. Is that true?
I pointedly do not update my iPads. It works now. I don't care. There's some security things you need to do. I have not uploaded the latest iOS for that exact reason. I think people have reported with not only these programs, but other things too, that Apple, in its quest to make things perfect, makes them also unusable and discontinues stuff that really does work, as we'll see in a minute. Does anybody else have any information about that?
Lawrence is saying a couple of things. Lawrence, do you want to chime in here?
I was just being a doofus. I was saying that you want it to make a lot of noise when you rip open the cover, so when somebody's stealing your iPad, you hear it and you come running. So
I think I need two covers, one for the classical gigs and one for the rock gigs.
Yeah.
Oh, what a snap.
I think that is a great idea, the magnets, though. Anything else?
That's all that's on the list.
Alrighty, thank you. Thank you, guys. So for your Wi-Fi network, you want to, and this is true for wired networks between the console and the stage box as well. You want to have dedicated networks. You don't want to connect it to the internet. You've got no use, your console has no use for the internet by and large. I don't know about other manufacturers, but these don't. And you don't want to connect to a campus-wide trunk system. And I'm going to break in here and tell you a story about a guy that I know who works on a big university campus not too far from where I'm sitting. And he's the sound guy there, or one of them. And they have, in his case, he's told me that they have a mandatory connection to the common network. Their IT people refuse to have any private networks on the campus. And this is a couple years ago. I haven't seen him for a little while. So their Yamaha console connected to their stage box had intermittent problems. It wouldn't connect. Things were just not happening. They had some big problems with it and did some big research to try to find what was going on. And they eventually found that a printer in a building a couple of buildings away had the exact same IP address as the console, which when they weren't being used simultaneously was maybe fine, but because they worked on different hours maybe, but when they were together, it was a big trouble. So they changed the IP address and it was fine, but there's no reason that you need to be connected to the trunk. I mean, for crying out loud. So the next piece is the router, which is the interface between the console and the tablet. And as I've kind of hinted so far here, most of my experience is with the Airport Express, which this is the thing I was referring to. Apple, in its infinite wisdom, has decided to discontinue this product and I think all other base station products. So you can't get them anymore. And you can't really see it from the picture, I think, but it's like 4 inches square with 1.25 inches or so thickness. And it's a real rugged plastic. It's not real flimsy. My Linksys ones are real flimsy. And this is a refurb, I'm sorry to say, and it's that much money. The refurbs that I bought directly from Apple were about 1/3 of this, but you can't get them anymore. But this is what I'm going to be talking about here today because that's my experience. So the principles for setting it up. The system security for your network is all in your router. Yes, there's a password protection on your tablet and you can lock your console maybe, but the console can be defeated by restarting the console. So you want to have some pretty good passwords and security protocols. And there's 3 possible types of protocols for routers. One is WEP, which is the oldest, but it's not secure anymore. And I'm going to show you a Behringer device that came out with a built-in router, but it only uses WEP protocol, so you don't want to use that one. WPA is newer and better than WEP, but it's still not as good as WPA2, and that's the one you want to use. And don't ask me what the difference is between those. There are people who know, and all I know is that WPA2 is the super duper one. So with any router, you're going to want to have 2 bitchin passwords, and I don't mean you use the word bitchin in your password, but you want to have real robust, strong passwords. One of them is the administrator password for the router, which lets you get into it and change passwords or change its functioning or whatever. You don't want to ever give that one out. You're the only one who has that password. Then there's a user password that allows you to use that router. And you still don't want to give that one out. You don't post it on the router with a Sharpie or something. You keep that pretty close to your chest because anybody who has that password can then control your console with the proper software. So I'm going to leave it up so that we can remember that. The routers operate on either 2.4 gigs or 5 gigahertz or both. There's a debate about which of those you should use. 2.4 goes farther, but that spectrum is really crowded. There's only 13 choices within that 2.4 gig range. All but 3 of them overlap with something else. So the only really usable channels are 1, 6, and 11 to not be subject to interference by other channels. The 5 gig doesn't go as far, but there's a lot more space up there. The most networks I've ever seen at a gig were somewhere over 144 visible ones, and I'll show you how to see them in a minute here. My tablet system worked just fine with all those networks around it. The last show that I did in February, there was 17 that were visible that were stronger than any of mine. And the digital stuff seems to really be able to talk, once it locks into the receiver, it seems to really be able to ignore all the other stuff. It's been surprising how well that works. And I'll show you in a minute how you see the networks. The next thing you need to decide is a hidden network name versus a visible network name. And we'll look at how you do the scanning right now. So if you have an iPhone or an iPad, you have in it an airport utility app. If you go to the iPhone or iPad system preferences and open the airport utility app, you see this, and this is the bottom of this first screen that you see in the airport utility. And I've scrolled down to save us some time, although the explanation probably took longer than doing it would take. And at the bottom there, you see this label Wi-Fi Scanner. And there's a slider there, and when it's green, you can use the Wi-Fi scanner. Default is off, of course. So if you want to scan using your iPhone or iPad, just flip that over there to the right there. If you don't have Apple products, there's a program called Fing that works on other platforms, and there probably are other ones too, but Fing works for sure. So now we're going to go to the first screen in the Apple utility. which is this one here. And it shows you the devices that it sees and if they are connected to the internet or not. The little green dot says that they are. Now, the Wi-Fi scan in blue in the upper right-hand corner, that's a button. So if you press that button, you get this screen, which wants you to tell it how long you want the duration of your scan should be. In continuous, it'll go for however long you want. I usually want it to go for 45 seconds, so I slide it over there. And then when you press the button in the upper right-hand corner again, which is now labeled scan, you get a screen like this that starts with the strongest network at the top, and you can scroll down to see the other active networks. And let's look at each entry here. So starting from the top there, we see AirMort. So that first word, first name, is the name of the network as set by the user. These are both visible networks that we're looking at here. The string of numbers and letters that's right below that identifies that model and maybe even that individual of router that has a manufacturing database somewhere where you can find what kind of router that is. The next thing down, RSSI, is received signal strength indicator, and that measures how strong the signal is in dBm, which is apparently the one they use for radio transmissions. And in this case, it's a negative number as compared to 0, which is full scale. So the smaller the negative number, the stronger the signal. So in this case, this one is minus 50. The one below it is minus 70. So the 50 is 20 dBm stronger than the other one. The last thing in that entry is where it says channel 149. The 3-digit numbers, and maybe even 2-digit, I'm not sure about that, are the 5 gig channels. And the single digits up to 13 are the 2.4 gig. So that's how you tell what it is. And the Airport Expresses broadcast simultaneously on both 2.4 and 5 gig. But the iPads, I've not been able to figure out a way to tell which one I'm connected to. I use the same name on both of them. You have to name both your 2.4 and your 5 gig. And I use the same name for both of them because I figure that it's going to switch automatically to it, and that's all I need. Maybe if I changed the name, I would know better. So moving on. Now we see a couple that have hidden names. You don't know if they are, what they are, or where they are. So I'm going to make you look at me again here. Even though these networks don't have names, they are still crackable if the wrong security or wrong passwords are used. So you need to be careful, again, to have a strong password. And these, you always imagine that there's some kid who's bored who's going to be trying to crack your network for fun. And I've never heard of it. I've never heard of somebody seizing control of something, but that doesn't mean it can't happen. So then here's the last two in that series, and you can see that we're down in the minus 90s. So the top network was minus 50, and the bottom network in this case is minus 94. I've never seen one that's above minus 30 or 40, I think. So I don't know what the deal is there. The next thing you need to decide is if you're using DHCP or a static IP. DHCP is more or less automatic if it's set up right. Some part of the system sends out an IP address to things that want to attach to it so that the IP addresses all work together. Some people feel that static IP is more reliable. When I started doing this, we couldn't get DHCP to work on the early consoles, so all of mine are static.